can you train effectively, sustainably, consistently whilst being a parent? In general terms, obviously there's unique situations that you can chuck in that will give caveats where you can't give a generalised answer.
Of course, somebody can always say, well, that doesn't work for me because, but in general, and I think I probably represent, and I've said this even from a training perspective and many times, quite an average setup. There's nothing sort of uniquely singular in my setup that allows me in particular to do things differently. So I think I can come at it from a relatively average perspective and say, well, if you can do this, if you look at it this way, if you consider these particular things, then you can certainly make yourself much more available to those options, or those options more available to you rather. So short answer, yes, it's doable.
Okay.
If
how?
Don't have kids.
No, that was
I've got it wrong already, haven't I?
And thanks for listening, everyone.
Goodbye. It's multifactorial. We said that in our own sort of Omnia campaigns and stuff, and most of these things do come down to it depends, but you can make your depends move around a little bit by controlling these things a little bit better. So I think you mentioned a minute ago that the everybody has different circumstances, and that's going to be, I'm jumping around a little bit in my head here. I am lucky enough to have a support network in that, or a support function, in that my wife is very, very supportive of the things that I want to do. Were she less supportive, it wouldn't be a particularly good relationship. But if there was kind of distinct cut-offs for her, if she was saying, no, this doesn't work for me because, then that would make it a lot harder. So open communication with Ashley, her understanding who I am as an individual and what training means to me, makes it much easier to get to the end point that I want. So if you're working against a partner or working in a situation where you haven't explained why it's important to you, or you know, that communication is not there, it's going to be harder. It's probably an easier way to break that down. Do you see where I'm coming from?
So yeah, I think if we're going to break this down into sort of points or a frame of reference for people, the foundation to work from is helping your partner understand why you care about making these things work.
Yeah, that kind of open communication and honesty. Quite often it's easy, and I've been guilty of these things myself. This wasn't always the case, and this is a fault of mine and not a fault on the other side of the table, but is just sort of having this self-interest or this idea, well, I train, that's a thing that I do, and that's a non-negotiable. Then means that the other person is saying, well, you know, you're not compromising, you're not entering into this with an open mind, and there's going to be pushback naturally and rightly. Whereas the communication that we had was for me to establish how much training allows me then to expose myself to myself, in the sense that training, as we've talked about many times, gives me an opportunity for self-reflection and self-development, as you mentioned. Without that, anybody is going to be kind of static and become very frustrated in of themselves. So reframing it and being honest about the fact that it's actually kind of a necessary output mechanism. It's a necessary therapy. It's not fair to suggest that training is therapy for everybody or anybody really, but it allows me to self-therapize, if that makes sense. I know that makes sense to you, hopefully to your listeners. But when it's clear to somebody that if you were to remove that altogether, that you'd feel less whole as a person, then it's important for them in a strong and loving relationship to try and facilitate that fullness of life for you. You know, and it could be anything. Training's the mechanism we're using to describe this, but if you were, I don't know, an artist or something, and you were told, I'm sorry, no time for music, and music is what sort of fulfilled your soul, then that's not a relationship that's going to work. But if you haven't described why that's important, then music isn't important to your partner anymore. So it's the same kind of thing. You have to say why this is important to you.
The challenge on the flip side there is if somebody isn't interested in the same things that you're interested in, it can often be difficult to comprehend why to another person it is interesting.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, for my example, I guess this recommendation still applies to me at this point, and I can probably have some insights on from training with a wife, partner, over the years that Erin and I have been together, she's always been very understanding and supportive of everything I've done,
Yeah.
albeit very stupid, but understands that the reason I am who I am is because of these things, means that you don't get one without the other. And I think it's that she doesn't get it in the sense that she has none of the same ambitions, focus points, interests from a training or exercise point of view. But that doesn't mean that she's managed to put her frame of reference when it comes to understanding those things in and of themselves to the side, to be able to look at it from my perspective and more reflect on who I am as a result of doing those things. And I think that's where, again, in modern relationships, that there's often a desire for dogma or boundaries around things without necessarily a bit more of the scratching beneath the surface of why things are important. I think one thing is communicating honestly and openly, but on the flip side is as an individual is being open to understanding that just because you don't get it doesn't mean that it therefore isn't something that is important to somebody else.
Yeah, yeah.
And things aren't as black and white as we often would like them to be, which means that one person's 6 hours in the Monroes on a Saturday morning, which is getting them out of bed at 4 and getting them back at 4 p.m, isn't them saying, you know what, I don't want to spend time with my partner.
Correct,
and I'm taking the day away. That could be the same as you said, somebody going to piano lessons 3 nights a week and coming back a much more fulfilled version of themselves, and that makes them a better partner downstream. It's all these things. But yeah, if Erin said she wanted to go and, I don't know, learn to watercolor paint 3 nights a week, and that meant that we were going to spend less time together during the week, but it was fulfilling for her, and therefore the time that we did get to spend together, because we were both fulfilled out with the day-to-day, that would be
nailed it as far
quality
as I'm
time.
concerned.
Whilst I wouldn't really understand the draw to learning to watercolor, I mean, I would, but I'm absolutely dog shit at art, so I guess the starting point would be difficult. But whilst I don't get the draw.
It's a good mechanism to describe the fact that everybody has their own thing, and our thing can, especially the extremes that we have enjoyed, take it to a place that doesn't quite, timeline wise, doesn't quite match up with the watercoloring thing. But ultimately, to bring it back to my personal example, and you mentioned it, is that time out in the hills for me, time out moving in the hills, brings me home to be a much more grounded, happy, and positive person. I just feel full of energy. I feel full of joy. It's a touch point for me that's almost spiritual. So if I get that and I come home, then I'm much more present as a partner and much more present as a father, because I'm connected to the things that are important to me. And that was communicating that appropriately, and having the backwards and forwards on that, then reframed it entirely. So I actually didn't think, he's fucked off into the hills for another 5 hours, the selfish bastard. It's like, no, when he gets back, I'm willing to give up that time, or I'm willing to spend that time on my own on that particular day with the kids, because when he gets back, he is, we get who he fully is. Whereas if I took that away from him and he didn't get to the, not that she would, but if we, if the compromise wasn't there, let's say, I wouldn't be that person, because I wouldn't be getting what I needed out of my own life. And a partnership is a partnership because you knit together and you do things for each other and for the family, but it doesn't and shouldn't mean that then you are no longer an individual. You should be facilitating each other's individual needs. And I guess that's why we talked about this first, I think, because that's absolutely vital. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a partner. If somebody's saying, well, it's not, it could be any kind of significant other, in the sense that this could be, you may still be living at home, or some kind of shared arrangement, or, as long as you're communicating with the people around you that also need your time, why this time away is important, or this time doing this thing is important, then I think you've got a step up the ladder in terms of being able to do this with kids in the room. So we haven't mentioned the kids, but we're mentioning the function of
the mindset to approach it with is it's kind of hours worked versus hourly rate. And the currency here isn't GBP or USD. It's kind of the availability and presence of the person in terms of whatever currency amount that is. Just by being around 5 hours more per week does not mean that there is actually going to be any more achieved from a household perspective or from a quality time perspective if you are being deprived of the sort of earnings, quote unquote, elsewhere. So just if you look at it as binarily as time inputted versus sort of value outputted, then we are, I think, missing a lot of what it is to be a happy, fulfilled human being.
Yeah, and I guess that could be a standalone, piece of advice from me to anybody anyway, whether you've got kids or not. Make sure you're communicating your needs, make sure you're communicating your love of things that perhaps don't exist within that particular relationship, because it's important not to be held back from those things. It's important to make sure that you chasing those things down doesn't hold somebody else back also. That's where compromise comes in. And I guess we'll probably talk about compromise as we carry on with this chat, but the ultimately open and honest communication could be a catch-all for so many things. And we know through experience, both of us, certainly I do, that when that's not present, it's very quickly things will start to suffer.